What's up, peers? And we're network here on the show, Open Source Everything. I'm still fighting a little bit with this microphone, so if I drop in and out, please don't be mad at me. I'm trying to fix it. Hopefully soon the Purism laptop arrives, and then we have a full-blown audio and full-blown quality again here on the hardware side. So today, really interesting discussion that I'm looking very much forward to. I'm talking to Juan Galt about the user-activated soft fork, the war that we won and fought for the Bitcoin independence. Juan, what's up?
Hey, how's it going, everybody? Very excited to talk about this. It's a very interesting topic, and happy to be on the show.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So let's get right into it, right? The user-activated soft fork was, well, user-activated. So this was something that was inherently driven by the users of Bitcoin, by the true hodlers of Bitcoin. And Juan, you've written now several, or you've interviewed several people, and I highly encourage you all to go to Juan's YouTube channel, link in the description, and check out these interviews. But now with you getting into touch to those people that were involved, just from a character point of view, where do you think were these? How were the users motivated? Why were they fighting this?
Yeah, so the general perspective that I've gotten is that these were people that were hardcore Bitcoiners. Like they believe in the vision, they believe in the technology, they are invested, and this scaling debate didn't make sense to them from any other perspective. It seemed that they didn't want to. So the guy that I interviewed in Latvia, he was I believe he's Irish. I'm not exactly sure. He's definitely kind of like Northern European. Or maybe I have no idea where he looks like a Viking, so I just called him a Viking. And he was saying that he didn't want to give up control of Bitcoin to some unelected group of corporations, American and sort of international corporations. That was what SegWit 2x was, and he didn't want to give power to Bitmain, which was sort of the biggest ASIC manufacturer at the time, and the arguments weren't making sense. So it depends how neutral we want to be about this, because it was in a sense a big conflict. But the bottom line was it was a very kind of like dark moment in Bitcoin's history, because we didn't really know what was going to happen. I mean, if you were more technical and been around for a long time, maybe you had more confidence, but the reality was like 80% of the hashing power was signaling for SegWit 2x. And then Bitmain was with the Bitcoin Cash fork. Roger Ver was a Bitcoin Cash fork. And like a good 10% of the community, maybe 50% was with Bitcoin Cash fork. And at the time, we didn't really know what the numbers were. And so the only option pretty much left to people that wanted SegWit, wanted it to pass, and wanted to keep the block size small was to do this user-activated soft fork, which was simply like a line on the sand. It's like, okay, we're going to have potentially reorgs. We're going to have a badly split network, right? It's sort of like what's happening with Bitcoin Cash and Bitcoin SV, or right now, where their network isn't really severed, right? There isn't replay protection. There's a potential for a reorg or various kinds of reorg attacks. The hashing power is volatile. Like that was kind of like the scenario we were walking into. And the UASF people were simply like, okay, we're just not going to accept any blocks with more than 1 megabyte block size, and we're going to support SegWit and let the chips fall where they may. And the bet was that they had more economic activity. And I think walking up to that moment, I was seeing definitely a lot of different meetup communities sort of be very vocal. I really want to interview Francis Polodny, if I didn't butcher his name too much, because he led, as far as I can tell, or was at the front lines of this movement in Canada, or the Canada Bitcoin sort of businesses and entrepreneurs and activists to enact to implement UASF. And part of the problem was that there wasn't software that made it easy for non-technical users. And so he's actually built a lot of this software. He had to build this for his own businesses out there, so that you could actually signal and have full control over your full node. He was, I believe, his business was, I believe, like attaching to various API websites and gathering data that way. And through those kind of services, he didn't have control over the versioning that was running. And so there was a lot of, it really kind of opened up, I think, a lot of people's eyes as to certain underlying game theory of Bitcoin, and in a sense, to this, there's a certain civic duty, especially as a holder and as a user. There's a certain civic duty. You vote with the version of your node, and you want to be updated to the latest if you believe in the latest. Especially right now, there's sort of like some bug risk, right? And so if you're not running it, it's really important that you run your own node, or at least learn how to do it and then run it, and also sort of be on the right version. It's not catastrophic, but it's important.
Oh yes, absolutely. It really is one of these pivotal moments in Bitcoin that ultimately has control over Bitcoin. And the main question was, is it like someone else, some external group of peoples, or is it the individual sovereign user who is running a Bitcoin full node, right? And that was the fundamental and the underlying question. And ultimately, right, what really is interesting was it contentious? Was the change that was being introduced something that not everyone agreed with? Because, well, we are working here with consensus, and everyone has to agree to these consensus rules. Otherwise, that wouldn't be consensus rules, right? And with segregated witness, it was not just something that a couple devs spun up over the weekend, half drunk in their basement. No, this was actually a piece of software that was very well researched, very well developed, went through rigorous peer review over several months. And until it came to a point where pretty much everyone was happy with the outcome. SegWit really is a magical fix to Bitcoin. It fixes the malleability bug. So basically that you can change a transaction ID without invalidating the signature. You can change the signature without invalidating the signature and changing the transaction ID. So that makes something like the Lightning Network possible, coin joins possible, right? So this is the malleability part. Further, it introduced some versioning so that you can actually update the signature mechanism, and we can now much easier integrate something like Schnorr signatures or BL, which will be some easier improvements in the future. And then, well, last but not least, it's actually a block size increase, because you remove some parts of the transaction. Well, the witness part, you segregate that out of the block. And that means that you have more space in the block itself to put other stuff. So we fix malleability, which brings us more privacy with coin joins, more scaling with Lightning. We introduce versioning, that is easier upgrades. And we increase the block size, and thus we have higher throughput. And that is pretty much a win-win-win-win. It's insane how good SegWit was. So, Juan, do you think that even though it was such a perfect fix to Bitcoin, why was it still so contentious?
Yeah. So as far as what motivates people, it's a complicated thing. I really found Peter Todd's argument as to the motivation of miners very, very, very compelling. That miners, a lot of these miners at the time, and they're probably still around, they raised money. Like it's a hard business to be a miner. It's highly, highly competitive. You need to be fairly technically savvy to deal with miners at scale. There's a lot of sort of sensitive things like electricity costs, and there's some geopolitical risk. Though all of the stuff we're doing has geopolitical risk. But like sort of, and then you have to raise significant money to have a significant piece of the pie, and then it's a long-term play. So his argument was that a lot of the miners actually wanted to become service providers and had built this into their pitch decks and raise money saying more or less they were going to be service providers, and they had all these ideas about how, what there were different ways that they're going to process transactions, and complex stuff that I've never heard about. Like, I mean, I've heard about some things, particularly like Via BTC had some service, and there's a couple of pools that were doing like, adding fee transactions that were sort of low fee when the market fees were high, like stuff like that. But that's the extent to that I ever saw anything like that, which tells me that it wasn't very interesting. It wasn't really being broadcast. Their marketing was certainly not effective. But there is evidence that they were doing this, right? And I think anyway, that's Peter Todd's argument, and that actually makes sense in a sense, because SegWit takes away a lot of their power over the way that things work. That it becomes the programmability of Bitcoin becomes enters the realm of software programmers, not mining operators, right? And that's better. That really is better. I think we're better off for that, and we can have that discussion, right, in more depth. But well, that's what the market decided, right? And the other thing is for the companies, for the corporations that were sort of hovering on top and trying to come up with make a decision. I mean, I have sympathy for SegWit2x in a way. I don't think that they were necessarily malicious. I think they were well intended, but they were just wrong. And there's something that happens when you reach certain levels of power, certain levels of influence, that when there's a critical decision, you kind of just move your chips, right? And I don't know that it's like, in a sense, I can't blame them for trying to make a decision. I wish they made a better decision. I wish they'd gone with, like, they'd been able to read the market, right? What the majority of people wanted to do, right? Like what the civilian population, if you will, of Bitcoin wanted, But the bottom line is they didn't, they misread it. And it's really interesting because let's assume for a moment that the UASF hadn't been a grassroots movement. We don't know what would have happened. Like, there might have been the two Bitcoins anyway. There might have been a Bitcoin Cash and a Bitcoin Core. There might have been a bunch of apathetic people like runs that were apathetic to the conflict, that just didn't take action. And all of these other options were hard forks. The reason UASF was such a great solution was that it was backwards compatible with everything else. So the people that weren't updating were still playing in the game. They weren't forked off. And that to me was the sort of the killer, right? Like SegWit makes sense to me. I believe that like there's this guy saying, like, responded to your tweet about this call, saying SegWit coin, if you recall, that's why the first major split happened. There's something that there were no heroes involved in making divorces. So this SegWit coin idea, this is all sort of propaganda from Bitcoin Cash at the time, suggesting that it's that is changing the fundamentals of Bitcoin. No. Bitcoin Cash changed the fundamentals of Bitcoin when they changed the difficulty algorithm, and miners were mining 40 blocks a day for the first 3 days. That's changing the fundamentals of Bitcoin. That's changing the supply and changing the difficulty adjustment. So no, you're completely in the wrong there. And then SegWit is, it's a miracle tree of the transaction hashes with the root inside of the block. You can still verify everything. You can still download it. You don't have to download it. It's backwards compatible. So it's like, Nakamoto consensus, that the Bitcoin that Satoshi created and left us, it's still there. We just build a thing on top of it to let it grow faster, right? To let it grow further, right? And so, I mean, we don't. If UASF hadn't been acted out at a grassroots level, there might have still been 2 Bitcoins, and maybe even 3 with SegWit2x. We don't know exactly what would have happened. It is the fact that people stood up and said, no, we reject these 3 options. We're going to take a third path, that basically put the nail in the coffin for both SegWit2x and Bitcoin Cash, because they ended up with like 10% of the network at 15% at peak.
Oh yes, absolutely, and that's one of the beauties that I missed when counting up all the cool stuff that is possible with SegWit, is that it is a soft fork. It is backwards compatible. It does not break consensus. And that is huge, because there are 2 ways of changing the rule set. Either you add new rules that were previously invalid, and that means that now transactions that would have been recognized by quote-unquote old nodes as just wrong, factually wrong, that they no longer that they are now correct and valid transactions. And that would be, for example, an increase in the block size, right? If the rules specifically say a block must not be larger than 1 megabyte, and you change it to 2 megabytes, like SegWit 2x proposed, well, that is a break in consensus. And that means that you change the rule of the underlying core infrastructure in a way that the users that have agreed to the previous set of rules are now being mistreated and broken in their voluntary agreement. The hard fork, in that sense, is a non-voluntary and rather malicious way of upgrading the network, because you force people to upgrade or to, well, update. Not really sure if it is an upgrade, right? That's not inherent. But with segregated witness, because you remove the witness part of the transaction, that just means that old clients, nodes that run on, what was it, version 15 previously, that they see these SegWit transactions as a anyone can spend transaction. So that means that according to their rule set, this transaction just doesn't require a signature. And anyone who proposes a transaction can spend these coins. So they just don't even see any signature at all, well, because it's segregated, right? But this is not a break in consensus, because from day one, Nakamoto consensus included that if there is no claim via a signature on these UTXOs, that they can be spent by anyone. These spending by anyone transactions have been around since a long time, and thus part of consensus. However, for these new nodes, for these really upgraded nodes, because SegWit is a upgrade, they still see the full signing, the full signature, the full public key proof and everything. So in that sense, SegWit did not break any rules. Rather, they changed it in a way that it is still backwards compatible. Do you see then other, or is there any further disagreement with the hard fork and soft fork, and where would have been the difference?
So one of the interesting ideas that I got sort of doing these interviews was an argument from J.W. Weatherman, who's he's a controversial guy in Bitcoin, but he argued that UASF didn't really matter as much as we think it mattered. And I disagree. I think part of the magic of this is goes back to an old libertarian sort of principle, which is the cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. The cost of freedom is eternal vigilance. We have to be attentive, and if we see an attack or something that's wrong, you have to speak, and you have to sort of put your flag on the ground and say this is the line. That's important. That's very important. But that's not to say that Bitcoin's consensus was fully dependent on UASF. I think and we don't have empirical evidence for this, but I think there's good argumentation to say that the confidence that the market has on Bitcoin has been the product of the open source process by which Bitcoin is developed, and to some degree the history through which Bitcoin has gone, and taking switching the software sort of creation process to SegWit 2x or to Bitcoin Cash is kind of like a change of government, where there is no confidence in those new governments, right? Or there's minority confidence in those governments, right? Like they want to start making different changes and big changes, and the market may have simply said, no, we're just going to reject both of you guys, even if all of your exchanges sort of switch to the other one. We're just not gonna go there. And vanilla Bitcoin could have kept going, and there would have been no SegWit, right? That was a possibility. Except that we got SegWit through, right? Because we stood up and fought. And so, this is an important part of the discussion too, because it's a sensitive thing. And I'm not making this argument, but if we believe that Bitcoin, that UASF was 100% why we won, then in a sense we're losing confidence in Bitcoin as a distributed structure that doesn't require that much human input. I think we needed to give it a push. Maybe we gave it a push, and that was better for Bitcoin. but it's important that Bitcoin be able to resist, a three-pronged attack from different sects, right, within Bitcoin. In a sense, it's proof that Bitcoin has scaled beyond social consensus. The drama during that time is proof that, and that it survived is proof that Bitcoin has grown beyond social consensus. For it to really be big enough and decentralized, for it to be really decentralized, there has to be contentious parties on all sides trying to gain control and failing to do so. That's proof of decentralization, and that's Bitcoin Cash. I in a sense I hate to talk about them, but they're such a great example, like a tragic example of what not to do, that it's interesting to highlight it. They went back, like as far as centralization, they put in a checkpoint, which hasn't been done in Bitcoin since like 2010. So they actually like rolled back the maturity of their copy of Bitcoin up to like age 2 of centralization. If we were to think of these systems as sort of children, right? Like they have a developmental process. Everything starts centralized and becomes decentralized over time. There's certain milestones. Well, they just rolled back. They've infantilized their own blockchain. That's a comedic tragedy, and a story worth remembering.
Oh, yes, absolutely. The Bcash debacle really is a setback. It proves how important it is to be, as you said, and to stay vigilant, right? To continue running a full node, not just because it's cool and because you can, because this is a weapon of self-defense. This is a financial weapon of self-defense against any other centralized party who will try to take away control of your money. And guess what? That's nothing new. That has happened with any currency at all times throughout history. If there are individuals who can take over the control of the money, they will do so. And one big part with the SegWit 2x thing is that they were literally taking over the code repository. They were moving it from the repository which Satoshi created, the GitHub/Bitcoin/Bitcoin, and moved it to BTC1. First of all, why is the 1 there? Do you want to have no versioning in the consensus? Is that what we're doing? And the well-established core process of updating and peer reviewing these changes and moving it to a repo where, well, Bitmain mainly controlled. So that is a huge trying to take away of the control of Bitcoin. And of course, then further, the increase in the block size, as we see it right now in Bcash, is at a point where you can no longer fully validate the entire blockchain because the blocks are too large, filled with garbage and nonsense. And actually, decentralized databases and blockchains are not efficient whatsoever. So if you want to be one of these true, and as you said, you have your civil duty of running a Bitcoin full node as a hodler. And if you want to continue doing this on as cheap as a hardware as possible, $30, then there are some aspects that we just have to take control of, and that is upon others the size of the blocks, of course. However, there is, of course, a argument for increasing the block size, right, and for increasing the capacity. And although, of course, SegWit was a soft fork way of increasing the, do you think that there would be a justifiable way of using hard forks in any shape or form of doing governance?
Well, I mean, like with anything, it's going to depend on the situation. There's going to be a lot of different variables. I don't think it's generally good to sort of say, as a general rule, it's not good to say, to see the world in black and white and there's no gray and there's no complexity and nuance. There's usually like 10 or 15 different causes for any single thing. There's no single cause events. So that's just kind of like a general, perhaps unrelated comment, but like As far as hard forks go, like I'm looking at this chart by Luke Jr. I'm gonna show you the screen here real quick. I believe this chart is talking about nodes that have updated to a version that is not vulnerable to the supply inflation bug that was found a couple of months ago, right? That's like more than 60% of the network, right? So with a critical inflation supply bug, people are not updating their nodes. That's the reality of Bitcoin, and that opens up an interesting sort of scenario where it might not be possible to do, like a hard fork that doesn't sort of sever the network. If this bug severed the network, like if there was some sort of reorg, right? Like somebody does a double spend, that transaction starts building, right? And then there's some sort of there's a fork around that transaction. Then a lot of these other nodes are going to end up split, right? And then we're going to get to see, like, this is my theory. I'm not an engineer, but this is my sort of understanding of how it would work. The version of Bitcoin that has the most confidence from the market is the one that would attract the hashing power and the money and would keep it, and then other people would be dumping the other one, right? And then on top of that, this is again another reason why you want to be validating the accounting, right? You want to either be running your full node or have a close friend and high trust friend that you can connect to their node, or you basically need to make sure that the node validating your accounting is healthy, right? Now this is the equivalent of this bug is the equivalent of cancer to the Bitcoin network, and your antibodies is running a full node. Is there a scenario where there's a healthy hard fork in the future? Only around like critical security infrastructure stuff, and even in apparently, this is not a, well, I don't know if you would consider this bug a hard fork thing. Maybe you can sort of illuminate us a little bit further on that, or we can use this bug as an example of it. I know it's a controversial issue, and I don't want to be alarming people, but yeah, you should probably be running your full node, and if you're running one and you haven't upgraded, you should really, really upgrade. But anyway.
Oh yes, absolutely. You should run a full node, absolutely. Either do it on your Raspberry Pi, do it on your laptop, or do it on your phone. Come on, AB Core, an app where you can have fully validating but not fully storing full node. Or little teaser here, check out nodl.it, nodl.it, for a really cool hardware device. But right, and as you said, you need to stay up to date with the software, of course, because there can be critical bugs, and there have already been several critical bugs, and these need to be addressed and fixed, right? But the tricky thing is, right, nobody can force you to change your software. This is your scarce hardware, and you fully control it. And you, of course, can also control which non-scarce software you will put onto this piece of hardware. And nobody can stop you from downloading a piece of software and installing it or not doing it. So Luke Dash is absolutely correct when he says that people should upgrade their nodes, but they're not doing it because nobody can force them to do so, which is, in my book, really, really, really good. And that's why I love Bitcoin so much. However, on the other side, it means that, well, it's our civic duty to make sure not just to update your own full node, but to make sure that your peers are updating. So important to, if we have such a critical bug, that the communication on the network, not just on the peer-to-peer Bitcoin layer network, but on the meat space social network, is that we make sure that we all are on the most up-to-date version. However, then on the other hand, the specific bug was only vulnerable for versions 14 point something up until 16.2. So if you're running a version before that, something like version 13 point something, then you're actually secure against that bug, right? So if we have old nodes running, then yes, they will not have all the efficiency gains and all the other cool features that the core process is working on, but at least they might not have a bug that was rather recently introduced. So this is actually quite interesting to see that old nodes might save the network if all the new upgraded nodes go offline because of a malicious bug. But then again, further, the bug fix, which was introduced in version 16.3, again, was no hard fork. It was a soft fork. So it's backwards compatible. It was only a minor change in the code. I think only a couple lines fixed it. But it was, again, not consensus breaking. Rather, it did restore consensus.
Yeah, and I'm actually seeing here that this chart, I don't know exactly, the numbers might not be that big. This might not be the actual chart we're looking for. And the reason for that is that I'm seeing like older versions here, according to this chart, say that they're also vulnerable. So going back pretty much quite far, but it might be counting all kinds of different vulnerabilities, not just the one that we're talking about. So, it's a tricky thing to not update, but it is also a tricky thing to update, right? So this is it's complicated thing, right? And I think there's a lot of ways to sort of get confidence about the versioning. I think basically you just gotta kind of pay attention, right? But this is to some degree it's still early software, and I think as we move forward, it'll become more and more stable, and more of these bugs will be found, and some of these versions will just be basically rock solid. And at some point, I do believe that at some point it'll just be not possible to change Bitcoin anymore. We'll be building layers on top. So yeah, that works.
Yeah, and again, that's the interesting question of how can we make sure on this microphone, how can we make sure that these nodes are actively updating? So interesting with the bug specifically is that the some of the core process members approached mining pools initially to upgrade their nodes. And other huge exchanges and so-called economic nodes. So do you think that it would be enough that only these economic nodes, these quote-unquote important participants of Bitcoin, are running a full node and are keeping good track of it, or should we all run a full node?
I don't know that it's reasonable to expect everybody to run a full node unless it becomes so easy to have that built into, let's say, phone wallets, right? Like if Mycelium, well, not Mycelium, I mean, they're kind of behind the curve here. If Samurai Wallet ran you could download a full node version, like the one that's pruned, like a pruned full node, so it's like, as you said, 5 gigabytes or so. I would do it. That's great. I don't have to, like, it's a one-click button download and I have the latest version type of thing, or I can choose the versioning. Like that's the level of advanced wallet software that I want, right? And it seems like something that would fit Samurai perfectly. So if you're listening, maybe add this to your roadmap. But like they've probably thought about it. These guys are really smart and really on it. I think that's great, but I don't really expect everybody to run a full node. I think that the reality of where this is gonna end up going, the only place where this starts to make sense to me, and not just in the sense of hosting, but also, I really like, for example, what Casa's doing, where you have one individual with 3 or 5 multi-sig keys for their own wealth. I think that's the next level of that, and the Casa HODL node, which is sort of a full node, which it's gonna, they may end up giving users sort of versioning control. It's aligned with the vision. That's the first sort of big step into the future of Bitcoin user experience. I think the next tier is going to be, okay, it's not just me that I care about, it's my whole family. How do I put my whole family under the umbrella of my multi-sig security scheme and my full node, right? So like if I'm the nerd in my family, right, how do I make sure that all our wealth is secure, and there's going to be a lot of experimentation that I would like to see and that I would like to do. You know, if I don't know who's throwing money at this, but there's a lot of experimentation that can be done, I think, around multi-sig and time locks and security in a way that we can create sort of, you know, this secure environments for our wealth with Bitcoin for our family, for our loved ones, right? And that's I think the next level, right? That's the flag that I'm starting to see further ahead in the horizon. How many years are we from this? I don't know. You know, I think right now Casa sort of is leading the charge as far as that vision of Bitcoin, and Trezor sort of going that direction as well. They're going to be adding support for they're working on support for a Lightning network, so your Trezor can be sort of like a hot wallet sort of security type of thing. And then they're also going to be adding shorn signatures, so that you can grab your master seed from the user from the user interface and split it up into 3 redundant pieces, so you can have basically like, you know, multi-sig and multi-sig below, for so to speak, right? Like you can have 2 of 3 sort of access for the backup, and that's to one Trezor, and that Trezor can be a multi-sig to another multi-sig scenario, so to speak, right? And I'm using the words not technically, you know, perfectly, but that there's utility in that, in distributing the storage, and then on top of that, there's the networking stuff. I know I'm going off topic here, so but I think that the point I'm trying to make is that not everyone has to host a full node, because I understand that there's people that it's just going to be overwhelming technically for them. And we shouldn't be so naive to think that everybody's going to be able to do that unless it's a one-click button, and even then, right? So we can leverage the high trust relationships around us, you know, to get people to just connect to our full node. And then where there's no trust, then you do full validation, right? You know, if you wouldn't connect to some random stranger's node on purpose, right? You know, like Bitcoin pulls randomly off of nodes and does verification with SPV wallets. There's this random sort of connection to different wallets, and that's how it solves that problem. But I think we need to think about that, about sort of how to leverage the high trust in our social networks to optimize the user experience of Bitcoin, because I don't think everybody's going to be running a full node, and not everybody's going to be doing a multi-signature, like a sovereign multi-signature sort of setup type of thing, right? Unless it becomes really, really easy, and I really hope that is the case.
Yes, and the interesting question is, who wants to have financial self-sovereignty? Because that is what Bitcoin can give you. If you choose to be the sovereign, the king, the monarch over your own money, and that you make your own rules and you verify them and, well, you execute upon them, then run a Bitcoin full node and own your. If you have these two, well, then nobody can take your money away from you, period. And that's something that has not been possible in the history of human. But of course, as Spider-Man taught us, with great power comes great responsibility. And I do believe that not everyone is an adult who will want to take this responsibility. And there are many people who are, in that sense, cowards, who would rather have the convenience of someone else taking care of them, which inherently is not necessarily bad, but at least they do not want to have this full control and responsibility. Because guess what? If you lose your private keys, poof, that's it. And no way that you can ever get your Bitcoin back. No, full node, there's not much harm you can do with running a full node. That's why you should run one. But still, this huge responsibility is not something that everyone can and wants to have. So it's interesting to see where these trade-offs will be. But I do believe that in general, it's also a question of the user interface. How easy, how convenient is it to run your own full node? How easy is it to own your own keys? Back in the days, it was horrible with single private keys and backups every 100 transactions. And that's horrible. That's not user-friendly at all. Now we have hierarchical deterministic wallets, right? Easy backup. Now we have hardware wallets, easy key generation and storage, and much, much more cool things coming around. So it got much easier to control your own keys. And I do believe that this will continue doing so in the future. And well, again, got to shill the nodal a bit, nodal.it, where you have on a pretty decent hardware, you have both your Bitcoin full node, you have your LND client, your Lightning node, you have BTC Pay server, and room for much, much more. Let's keep it like that. We actually first want to make sure that it's actually running before we say exactly what we have on there. But you can a lot of cool stuff on the device which you're running your Bitcoin full node at. And then you have a always on, always connected device that is your financial battle station in that sense, where you really have the possibility of having full control over your money and in an absolute sense. And I'm curious to see how many people will run a full node when it is as convenient as connecting to the internet.
Yeah, I think it's going to be very, very interesting to see that. And, you know, I don't expect everybody to take this. I think that the thing that Bitcoin offers to people undeniably is financial freedom and sovereignty. And the cost, the real price is responsibility. And that's a beautiful and empowering and satisfying thing for some people. And some people are gonna struggle with that, and I think that, you know, we're gonna end up seeing, I think in a healthy environment, we would end up seeing some distribution of labor around this, which is why I talk about sort of like extending the umbrella of your sovereignty to your family and having tools that make that easy, right? And then the next question is like generational wealth and how we pass that wealth on securely. I mean, that's a whole other question that I'm very interested in. But again, I'm not seeing money being thrown at this. And this takes me back to one of the conversation that I heard Richard Hart have in a panel of sort of blockchain leaders. Our friend from the crypto show, or my friend from the crypto show, was hosting it. Anyway, I shared the link on Twitter. I'll retweet it again. And this conversation was great because they ended up sort of kind of settling on this concept that one of the dilemmas, you know, I think this is a dilemma in society in general, but it's particularly sort of visible with open source, is that if you want a very good service to exist for the whole public, somebody has to sacrifice a significant amount of wealth and talent to create it and release it into the open source world. And then once it's released and good, then everybody can take from it. And it's a sort of, in a sense, a near infinite sort of source of wealth that somebody just gifted the world. But somebody has to front those costs, right? If you build a business around it, what we've seen in crypto is people have these brilliant ideas, and some of them are actually good ideas. A lot of them are just science fiction. Some of them are just straight up garbage ideas. But they have ideas, and this whole sort of theory that crypto was going to help fund open source, what ended up happening is all these teams ended up just jamming, like doing an ICO, raise a bunch of money, right? So it's like creativity and naivety. They raise a bunch of money, launch an ICO, and then within the next 3 years, try to jam this token in the middle of it. And then what we end up with is services with terrible user experience, because not only do I have to buy Bitcoin sometimes or like pay with credit card or whatever, which I guess that's fine. You know, credit card is fairly easy to use if you have credit card. Not everybody has a credit card, but you end up having to like buy the token. So I have to go to your company to buy your private currency so that I can give it back to you in order for the exchange for the service. That's insane, right? Like that's completely redundant and useless. And it's a misunderstanding of the purpose of currency. All these blockchain startups, the only way that they're going to work is if they're building businesses and letting people use the currency that has the population's confidence. And but that gets rid of the incentive to create things in the open source, right? And so, because you can't just raise money with token, you have to raise money privately, and then that means that the private money is going to want to have control. So there's some interesting questions here. I think to move forward in in the ethos of Bitcoin, you know, well, Casa's doing it. That's good. That gives me hope. That gives me a lot of hope. And Trezor's doing a great job, and you know, Ledger's doing a good job. You know, I like Trezor better than Ledger, but still, they're very useful. I just think we're gonna need innovation in this area of the market. Otherwise, we're gonna end up in a world where it's gonna be institutional custodial sort of services, and that's problematic from a variety of angles, right? If we believe that economic nodes have significant power over the consensus of Bitcoin, and we're seeing Backed and Fidelity come in, and they're going to become custodial sort of services for Bitcoin for large amounts of the population, and there's who knows what kind of financial services they're going to be adding on top of that, right? What does that do to a UASF? Does that turn UASF into a kind of attack vector, right? Like, what kind of influence can Backed and Fidelity have on consensus of Bitcoin, right? Are we big enough to resist that? I think we probably are big enough to resist that, mainly because the people that are in it, Bitcoin right now, are very, they were still driven by passion, and maybe Bitcoin is already hard enough to change, but there's some questions there that we won't really know fundamentally until the conflict happens, and we have to deal with the challenge, right? And we have to rise to the challenge. So my point is, it's important that there's tools to continue to support the sovereignty, right? And I'm doing that. I'm helping people sort of. I do consulting for people, and I help people keep their sovereignty, right? And that's something that I'm very interested in doing, and it's one of the services that I offer people. But I like to see a lot more entrepreneurial energy come at this, and I really would hope that I would love to see a lot of the talent that's distracted by the altcoins, and even to a great degree distracted by all these sort of token plays in Ethereum, which are basically right now getting burned at the stake by the SEC one by one. I would love to see that talent come over here to Bitcoin. Bitcoin's going to become a currency. Lightning Network's going to scale. Let's build some stuff over here, and we can actually get to that place of smart contracts, which you can do. You can build them in Bitcoin. It's just you got to think about it a little bit differently. And anyway, we can make some more progress.
Yes, it's really interesting the fact that these altcoins, right, these shitcoins, they can inflate the money supply, right? Their own money. They can print money as much as they want, and then, of course, further, that means that they can use this printed money to buy themselves some developers and throw money at them. Their own printed money that nobody really wants, but at least it works, especially in the short run. However, this always lead to malinvestment and overconsumption. So in the long run, these hyperinflationary projects, most of them will fail because they just don't live prudently and think ahead and plan for the future. And that's something that is really prevalent in Bitcoin. The entire meme of hodling is based on the postponing of satisfaction and the postponing of the gratification through consumption and production. So that is something that is inherent in the Bitcoin ethos. And of course, there are many proponents of this low time preference, of this forward thinking. And the question to you, Juan, would be, is that without these dedicated people who not just dedicate their lives for Bitcoin in general, but specifically in a adversarial condition, for example, with the Bcash dilemma and the blocking of SegWit, do you think that Bitcoin would have behaved the same if there would be not as many dedicated and heroes of Bitcoin involved who were pushing to retain their financial sovereignty? Or do you think that the inherent structure in Bitcoin is in the consensus rules is enough to make sure that the
So everybody that I talk to that has experience in open source and is an IT sort of engineer, or pretty much everybody except one person that I can think of has argued that who holds the repo is not who holds the power. the power is in the confidence that emerges, or that emerges when quality open source work happens in the space, right? And so all the open source work that's happened with Bitcoin Core, that work is what has produced a strong Bitcoin. That the repo would change hands in an attempt to take over Bitcoin, that doesn't really bring the majority of the confidence, right? Some people will fall for it for sure, right? And that's why it's fair to call it a scam. But the majority of people, like the people, or at least not the majority of people, the people that are best at managing money and that are going to do their research and going to make careful decisions, they will ask a few engineers and they'll be like, yeah, no, that code is garbage. Don't go with that. And so they'll keep their money where the best code is. And it is, like, it's a true meritocracy, which is why it's so funny to me. It's so funny to me that so many ANCAPs, anarcho-capitalists, at least in the branch that I was sort of, living amongst, and it's not all of them, but it's a significant portion, ended up in this fork of a fork drama in Bcash. And that's the market responding, right? That's the market responding to what they're doing. So I don't know that I'd be concerned. I think the question really is, how decentralized is Bitcoin? Decentralized enough to handle a, let's say, the next three-pronged attack type of thing? I think we probably are at this point, but that doesn't mean we should get complacent, because it's still early in this movement, and there's plenty of people plenty of entrenched interests that are opposed to Bitcoin. So we need to keep pushing the advantage that we have. So,
oh yes, this is far from over. We of course have more than 7 billion people who are at the moment not using Bitcoin, right? They're not hodling. So we still have to convince all of them, and a lot of them will not like the freedom that Bitcoin will bring. And you brought something up that is really interesting, and that I've been wondering myself for a bit. Is that before we get into this, Gregor Kovacs in the chat, thank you very much for the $5 donation. Really appreciate it. Cool to have your support. Thank you. But back to the question is that why is it that a lot of the libertarian-minded, a lot of the MCAPs jumped onto the Bcash train, right? If you went to, for example, an Acapulco, it was full with Bitcoin.com, full with Bcash drama. The Liberland guys were all up in Bcash, and just in general, I had the feeling that a lot of the libertarians that used to be in Bitcoin before moved over to Bcash. Now, is that only because Roger Ver was, of course, a libertarian and strongly shilling Bcash, or is there some underlying reason why these usually liberty-minded and self-sovereign-minded people kind of gave up their self-sovereignty?
Yeah, that's a fantastic question, and it's something that I've been thinking a lot about ever since that fork. I think that fork really, like, it wasn't just a technical fork, it was a social fork. I still, like, I'll have a beer with a lot of these people. We'll have lunch, or if the opportunity comes up, I'll sit down with them and talk. But there's something that's fundamentally different, I think, or at least in the way that we think, and I think that the difference is, having been an NCAP and having I actually struggled with this fork. I wasn't sure who was who. But at the beginning, for years, I believed the Blockstream conspiracy, and I even made this argument that Dash, my famous Dash video, which is 30,000 views, was me arguing that private corporate interests were because if you follow the money, they're manipulating the code. And that's a really terrible, almost anti-capitalistic sort of thing, right? To think that you can't actually form an agreement that's balanced, right? anyway, like I've already spent enough time dispelling those myths in, you know, public conversations, hundreds of conversations like this one, and articles and stuff. But I believed it. Like I was in that mindset, and my conclusion today is that there's a certain branch of anarcho-capitalism that is the highest virtue for them is competition, and because of that, any one, whatever your part of the market you're looking at, any one entity that acquires domination over the market, or like a vast majority of market share, is now seen as a, you know, takeover or corruption of the market, as some sort of like they are the conquest. It's an empire, because the thesis is, as long as there's competition, there's going to be balance in the market. But the reality of markets, the reality of nature, it seems to be, is that 4% of any group of entities that you define are going to be pretty much completely responsible for 40% of the output of that group. It's the Pareto principle, the 80-20 principle. A small portion of highly talented, highly specialized people are going to be better than the vast majority of people at this one thing. And that's the way that markets work. In fact, that's the foundation of distribution of labor in economics, right? And capitalism and libertarianism, right? They've forgotten the fundamental principles that they've built these conclusions on, and now they're floating on this weird wave of conclusions, this kind of like rehashed form of anarcho-capitalism. And so when they see Bitcoin sort of becoming hard to change and growing a lot, and not letting them implement their own thing, they think, oh, it's been that, you know, this conspiracy starts to make sense, and they're like, oh well, you know, it's been taken over. But it's tragic, right? Like they're basically adverse, like allergic to success, you know? Like this is my theory about Roger Ver. I think that Roger Ver is so believes to himself to be such an libertarian hero, that to succeed he knew that he would, you know, in a weird unconscious way, and this is totally my opinion, right? He saw himself ending up becoming like a Rockefeller in like 20 years. And he talked so much shit about the people that are at the top of society that he couldn't face himself that way. So he rather forked and had this little private island for himself in the industry. And that's something that I think a lot of us libertarians have to contend with, the possibility that some of the people at the top, not all of them, sure, there's bad people up there, but some of the people at the top actually got there through pure merit and voluntary interaction in a complex game theoretical environment. And they are simply the best. They're not just bad people with shady dealings. No, like they just fucking won, right? In a fair combat. And that's, I think, the mistake, the ideological mistake that a lot of these ANCAPs make.
Yes, very, very good point. And inherently, there is, of course, a problem with the Cantillon effect, right? That those that produce the money will transform the purchasing power from those that save to themselves. And inherently, that means that with a inflation-based and especially a fiat and debt-based inflation system, like fiat currencies, US dollar, euro, and so on, that there are actually those on the top most likely are somehow involved with the money production business, and thus they are literally stealing from other people. And of course, theft is wrong. We all should know that. And of course, then these people that have accumulated a lot of wealth because of their theft are not in this place righteously, right? They should not be on the top. However, they are, right? And we kind of have to contend with that and make sure that it doesn't happen. However, we should not draw the conclusion that because there is the possibility that those on top have accumulated this wealth with stealing, we should not think immediately that that means that everyone who is on top has stolen and has accumulated this value and this wealth by theft and other immoral means. As you said, there are individuals who are dedicated and solving problems and voluntarily interacting and making sure that the marketplace flourishes. And these entrepreneurs absolutely deserve their place in society and in the And further, what you brought up, the Pareto principle, and I think that is quite nice, is to see that a small group of highly dedicated and highly motivated individuals can push in Bitcoin for a consensus non-critical change. So basically, if you're a dedicated developer or entrepreneur in the Bitcoin space, you can, with enough willpower, manifest your soft fork within the consensus. We've seen that with SegWit, right? A small group of people getting their shit together and really working hard on it until they made it happen. However, then jumping forward a couple months in history to the SegWit 2x, right? This was a non-consensus or consensus-breaking rule change, right? The 2x, the increase of the block size. That was a hard fork, and only a really small group of people, although they were dedicated, they could not force their rule set on others, their hard fork on others, because they did not have overreaching. So although it is possible for a small group of people to manifest change if it is according to consensus, it is almost impossible, even for a hyper majority of actors, to take over the consensus rules and hard fork the network. So Juan, could you please go a bit more into detail in the difference of the user-activated soft fork and then the SegWit 2x hard fork?
Yeah, the SegWit 2x hard fork, I mean, it was backwards incompatible. The SegWit 2x hard fork was backwards incompatible. It was a different GitHub repo. It was kind of a corporate effort, right? A New York agreement type of thing where, you know, CEOs of the industry kind of got together and made a decision. That's the bottom line, you know, like what would have happened if they had actually launched? Because the funny thing about SegWit 2x is that they had 80% of the hashing power signaling for them. And yet, like the day before, 12 hours before Flag Day, more or less, the miners folded, you know. They were like, you know what, this is, it's not looking good. Most of the support seems to be on the UASF side. We're just gonna fold, and they folded. And then on top of that, it had a bug in it, right? And it didn't launch. It broke the failure to launch. Didn't even run, which was a Jeff Garsick mistake. So, you know, it just what can I say? The market was right. I'm sorry if I didn't answer your question. Maybe you can ask me again, and I'll take another shot at it.
Well, I do think that you actually answered it quite nicely. That although there was a lot of push by the let's say ecosystem, by a small minority, right? Well, maybe not even a minority. There were large exchanges, right? Big miners and other huge businesses that were for this change of the rule set. However, and maybe they would have gotten their way if it would have been a soft fork, if it would not break the rules of us running a full node, right? But because it was a hard fork and thus inherently contentious, even this well-connected and wealthy group of individuals with a lot of financial power and maybe even political power, that they still couldn't push back these changes.
Yeah, it's just incredible thinking about it on hindsight. Like the idea that Bitcoin can't scale. This is the belief. Therefore, to scale it, we're going to create basically a new version of Bitcoin and try to take as many people from that Bitcoin as possible. Like the idea of forking as a solution to scaling is just unbelievably, it's just so confused. Because like the to scale is to reach a wider amount of people, right? To reach more people, not less. You don't want to fork. You know, if you fork, you're literally cutting off a limb. You're cutting yourself in half to scale. I think the thinking was like, well, the market will settle it. The market will decide. Yeah, they'll decide in 20 years, right? Or like 5-10 years, right? we're gonna see. Well, it might not take that long, right? I mean, Bcash is losing like probably 0.5% every month or something like that. But like, I mean, I don't know. I think the SegWit to X guys were probably well intentioned. Like I'm a fan of Eric Voorhees, even though he's not like a super maximalist, right? Jeff Garcic isn't. I don't know exactly the story. Maybe I was too late to see what the drama with him is. But he definitely fucked up on that one. I mean, I was there to see Gavin Andresen burn his whole reputation in one fell swoop, right? So glad he wasn't involved with that. It would have been too obvious. Um, so I don't know, but yeah, I mean, sorry, totally forgot your question now. I'm fasting today, so I'm like, I'm at like in a weird place.
Which is good. Fasting is actually quite a nice thing to do. And yeah, again, you actually did answer the question quite nicely. And I do like this approach of saying that forking is the antithesis of scaling, because you split the network, right? You decrease the network effect, you decrease the value. And I do believe that we're seeing this now, especially with the Satoshi's vision and ABC nonsense in Bcash, that once you set the precedence for a governance by forking, by forcing others to adapt your rule change, well, it leads to a state with several different splinters, right? Different currencies, but then none of them is money, which is the sole most widely spread and most saleable money or currency. Thus, you will fall back to a state of barter, which is controlled by a couple individual cabals, each individually. So you will have centralized shitcoins in a barter economy. That is not sound money. So I do believe that forking is the antithesis of a sound money. Or I ask you if you agree with that, then the mic cut out. So do you agree with that?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. I think you hit it over the head. I think that's touching on the core of culturally and as a part of the greater, I guess, libertarian movement that is. And the funny thing about Bitcoin is that it's not just libertarian money, because there's people from the left, there's people from the right, from the center, from various degrees of society. Like, you can find people all over the place, right? I've met some fascinating people in crypto. Yeah, a lot of them, like a lot of the ones that I meet are libertarians, right? But then again, I move within certain circles. But it's bigger than that, and I think it's sort of showing like this whole that whole fork and Bitcoin as a whole is a great experiment in certain political theory, which is freedom and individual sovereignty. Let people do whatever they're gonna do, and yes, that's great. Like, you protect your own wealth, and you protect it so others can steal from it. So to make it harder for theft to happen. So that's essential. And then you have sovereignty, and with sovereignty comes freedom, and with that comes responsibility. Within the space of freedom, there's good choices and bad choices. And now we're seeing this sort of branch of anarcho-capitalists act out bad choices in political theory. And those bad choices are the idea that it's them acting out, in a sense, the wish that I've heard as a libertarian for 10 years, that I've heard broadcast, which is, we just want to, New Hampshire is a good example of this, like, just create your own state, right? Or go to Acapulco and create your own anarchist utopia, or go to Libertopia and create your own little utopia, right? So, they might be doing pretty well. I have no idea what levels of drama there are down there. There's probably significant drama. There's drama everywhere, right? I'm not saying it's a bad idea, but you do it at the risk of fragmentation, right? And that's, in a sense, why you gotta wonder, why have libertarians failed, in a sense, in a way, have failed by their own claims, right? For, like, even though they've been around for a long time and they seem to have great arguments, right? I think they've failed because they lack strategic thinking, and they lack they don't leverage the instead of grabbing the best idea and trying to bring that to the whole world, they're okay with a bunch of shitty ideas competing with each other, right? It's like Bitcoin Core is the best of engineering argumentation as far as cryptocurrencies are concerned. Like the best arguments, the best debates, the product of the best conversation through speech and intelligence and attention has produced Bitcoin. And they disagree with it and they fork and then they have a shittier version and they're confused. It's like, yes, language is not an empire, right? The fact that we all speak the same language is not a monopoly over the marketplace of language, right? It's just the best language, right? And so, anyway, I think I really like the idea. This is really funny, actually. The thing you can rely on with like sadistic people and sociopaths like Craig Wright is that they will give you just enough truth to lure you in so that they can stuff bullshit down your throat, right? That's playbook 101 of sadists and sociopaths, in case, people that don't know that. You bait is some truth, you put some truth and you bait them in, and then you feed them bullshit and you try to take over their thinking, right? The one bait of truth that I've seen Craig Wright say in the recent times is that without property rights, you don't have capitalism. Property rights is a base layer that needs to exist for capitalism and competition to exist on top. If you have two stable, a stable communist sort of group and a stable sort of property rights group, the front lines of that war is going to be chaotic, and there's going to be no capitalism in that area, right? It's just going to be a trench war, right? So you can't, it's like the capitalism doesn't work on both. It works in property rights land. In that sense, you do need to have a monopoly over property right sort of standards, I guess. Not necessarily, right? You want to have options in conflict resolution, but I think you guys get the general point, right? You need scale for property rights, and in this case, Bitcoin is the foundation of this sort of new generation of property rights, and then the competition will happen on top, and the innovation will happen on top.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Freedom cannot prevail property rights, right? Property rights is essential for any free and prosperous society. Because if you do not own yourself, if you do not have property in your own body, well, that's slavery and absolutely anything but a free society. And that continues, of course, with all your goods and services that you produce, right? If you don't own them, well, then you are just another slave and definitely not a free man. And so, yes, property rights are inherent, absolutely, in any free and prosperous society, and especially a capitalistic one, right? And I really like your point that the strategic thinking might be something that is lacking with the quote unquote libertarian, although you cannot really put that in a box, right? But I might agree with you that here. Because again, right, the arguments of libertarianism are rather logical and reasonable, but it still seems that we never really have achieved full freedom on this planet, and especially not currently. And then the question, though, would be, how about the Bitcoin consensus as exactly that strategic vision that we needed at this rallying cry of all working together and working under the same consensus, and making sure that we do not fork off, because it just, right, it's impossible with a full node. With a full node, the forks are automatically per default rejected. So there's a high incentive and just a high technical debt for staying in accordance with consensus. And do you think that this, as Gastronet said in the chat, this consensus governance is what was missing for this libertarian cohesion?
Consensus government. I don't know exactly what that means, but I assume it's something along the lines of sort of, every change requires a high percentage of consensus. To really have a discussion about political theory, I think will require us to spend about another 2 hours sort of looking at the options. I was listening to the Rose talking about kind of a topic along the lines of what we're discussing yet last night, and he's going to have me on the show soon. He said so. I'll probably have that conversation with him then, and that would be awesome. It's going to be an interesting talk about political theory, but I think as far as the libertarianism and strategy, you know, like my experience of libertarianism in general has been that they have good conclusions, but they don't take it all the way. They don't go all the way with them, right? So yes, property rights are good, and that's undeniable. To me, that's undeniable. I can't deny that. Property rights are good. The problem is not that property rights are good. The problem is that there's people that are willing to violate property rights, and how do you defend against that? Okay, you put a fence, you get a gun, you lock your room. Great. How do you defend that at scale? How do you scale that? Because the bad guys, like there's economies of scale in violence as well. There's network effects in violence as well, which is why there's governments. Governments are network effects of violence with very complex sort of management structures over a long period of time. And some of them are really bad and some of them are decent, right? And that's seems to me, that's what I see now. So this is a really good example of like crypto is such a great experiment for this particular political theory, and it's going to change libertarianism. It's already done it. Fraud. If you ask any anarcho-capitalist how to deal with fraud, they don't have an answer. I've never heard an answer to fraud. Like with the NAP, okay, you just get a gun for theft. You know, for murder, you get a gun, right? Or you just physical defense, right? For everything, there's basically get a gun. But with fraud, you don't really, like, the gun is a little bit too much, right? Because fraud is in this weird gray zone of speech, right? And so you have to have concepts like propaganda, which is a misuse of information to manipulate people with half-truths or mistruths. And I've heard like hardcore AMPCAPs say that everything is propaganda, right? So that's weird, but that's just one guy, right? So I don't want to generalize over just one guy, right? But you have to have things like propaganda. You have to have things like lying and fraud, and then you have to, you know, you have to deal with it's a very complex topic, and that's why I think we see such wide amount of dumb money in a sense going into all these silly science fiction crypto projects and raising crazy amounts of money, because there's a lot of naivety, right? You know, bad investment, like people with no investment experience, and a lot of people that are also naive, right? And then there's a bunch of scammers in between, right? And libertarians don't have a solution for fraud. They don't have a good theory for it. I've never heard a good theory for how to come out of this sort of past 10 years of altcoins, right? Or at least sort of 7 years of altcoins, is to call everything a scam except Bitcoin. And that works. That's a functional belief. If you believe that everything in crypto is a scam except Bitcoin, even if it's not true, that's probably going to result in you making more money by just hodling Bitcoin than if you try to and judge the one at a time which one's a scam or not, because the amount of time you would waste or spend trying to find the good ones would be, insane. And Bitcoin over time ends up beating most altcoins. And so the best answer we've had is, most things are probably a scam, and just hold, like in crypto, and just hold your wealth, hold Bitcoin, and you'll probably be okay. And to me, that's in a sense like an emergent sort of belief system that's healthy, but it also shows sort of a lack of education and academic sort of fruits from the libertarian academic people.
Yes, that's very, very interesting, and I do believe that this is one of the most fascinating fields to study, human theory, right? To study the theory of how humans interact, and now in the combination of cyber and meat space, so quite interesting. And of course, we can look back to something like the user-activated soft fork and the No2X movement, and see how it was applied in history. But then maybe we can extrapolate on how it might work out in the future. So having seen that in the early days, Bitcoin was rather centralized, right? Satoshi had a lot of leeway with the code, and he actually did introduce a couple hard forks back then, which, because the network was small, went by rather smoothly. But now we've seen, even with SegWit, a change in the code that was a soft fork and was all around a win-win situation for everyone, that it was still really, really, really difficult to implement in consensus. So Juan, where do you see the future updates and the contentious aspect on whether or not they will be accepted to consensus rules?
I'd like to see Bitcoin ossify. I think you know, having experienced the last fork, I'm still tired from it. And I'm still wound up about it, even though I'm cooling off. Those kind of consensus conflicts are the equivalent of civil war, psychologically speaking. Everybody that I've talked to has sort of echoed this, that it felt like a civil war, even though the costs from a physical security perspective were minimal. From a wealth perspective, they were significant. They're great, right? Anybody that's invested, you know, serious money into Bitcoin felt that pressure. And so I think this consensus conflicts are best made mute in a sense. And I don't know that we're there yet, but I think that's the direction we're going. We're going to get to a point where the Nakamoto consensus, the fundamental layer, will just not be changed. And then the new space for let's say competition and play is going to be around which version of Bitcoin you're running, right? So and then a bunch of other services on top. But like, it's going to be really interesting with this particular bug, the inflation bug, because right now, right, I could go and download the vulnerable version and then create some fake Bitcoin and then go and engage a client that's also, you know, that's also running that software, and I would be able to give them fake Bitcoin, right? That's my understanding of the bug. I'm not an engineer. I can't read code, just FYI. But from what I've been reading, that seems to be what is possible. So assuming that I had technical skills to do that, I would be able to do that, right? How does the merchant defend themselves? Well, they defend themselves by running an updated version of Bitcoin that has immunity to this bug, to this virus. This is essentially a vulnerability in older versions, right? You can think of it as a virus, and the full node, the updated full node, has immunity to it. And so when I send the money, their node is going to be like, oh no, that coin does not exist. That's bullshit. And then you would identify me as a scammer or as somebody that has counterfeit Bitcoin, essentially, right? And now I would look at this and, well, I would start tracing back, and then I would get an impetus to boost my immune system by getting a working full node, right? That's such a great example to me of where the space of versioning sort of security, if you will probably happen, because if Bitcoin becomes sort of ossified, whatever bugs are left in it are going to be left in it. And so it's going to be a soft fork sort of evolution. And if you're running, you know, if you're running software from the Middle Ages, you're going to get wrecked by the imperialism, right? So that's just kind of the way that it is, right? You're going to, if you're running Middle Ages software, the Enlightenment is going to destroy your wealth, right? So, you know, that's human experience.
That's very, very, very much so, and very interesting. And I just had a nice conversation with Jeremy in the chat, and always nice hanging out with you in the chat. So please be active and ask your questions there. And what he's wondering is whether I don't want to put words in his mouth. So roughly summarizing, that there might be critical changes to come in the future, right? There might be individuals who change their own individual consensus rules so that Bitcoin has 22 million coins, right? And in a sense, of course, that is a hard fork, right? That means that I, who agreed initially with Nakamoto consensus to run with 21 million, am now broken in my rule set. So inherently, I, as an individual self-sovereign node who's not as an undivided node and not being represented by anyone, will tell to Jeremy's node that I do not accept his proposed rule change and that I will thus block him. And of course, ostracizing him and telling all my friends that he's a malicious actor according to our consensus rules. And that means, of course, that although other people might change their rule set, their individual set of rules, what I am running on my full node is 100% up to me, and nobody can force me to change that. However, then of course, on the next level, if everyone on the planet decides to no longer run with Bitcoin but with Dogecoin, a consensus break of Bitcoin, right? And if everyone is saying that, and if all the merchants are only accepting Dogecoin, and if all the peers are only accepting Dogecoin, well, still, they broke my original consensus rules. They are still no longer in my network. And I might be the only one sticking to these old consensus rules, or well, by then they're no longer consensus or majority consensus, right? But for me, my individual set of rules, they haven't changed. However, on the macro level, for the entire globe, so not just my individual network, but the large intra network, so to say, there the consensus might shift again. But then again, right? What is the network effect of money? And that means that a lot of the network capacity and activity will be with that sound money, which is the hardest to produce, and the most unchanging in its political, and the hardest to change in its monetary theory. So Juan, where do you see that maybe in the future there might, after all, be a hard fork that will break consensus, but will take over as the main overall consensus?
Yeah, I mean, if there's a hard fork in the future that's around some sort of critical, some sort of critical vulnerability, or some sort of, you know, it would have to be dramatic. Oh, sorry about that. You fell off the sky. It would have to be very dramatic for there to be a hard fork, and getting social consensus for it is going to be impossible. So the only way that it's going to happen is if the bug itself forks the network, and then right? I think that, and that's good. That's you wanted decentralization. That's what decentralization looks like. Nobody can change that's decentralization, and that's okay. So I'm glad we got SegWit in, because we can build stuff on SegWit that we couldn't build on vanilla Bitcoin. I think we were left with something better. If you think SegWit is some sort of conspiracy from Bilderberg, or whatever bullshit you think is going on about SegWit, right? You don't have to use SegWit. You can build anything you want on vanilla Bitcoin. You can use like normal Bitcoin addresses and do normal Bitcoin stuff as you could have before SegWit. So that's the beauty of backwards compatibility. If I was a voluntarist, which I am, I would point out that that's the best form of voluntarism, is backwards compatibility. So there, you have your freedom, and I have it too, and we're both in the same language. Yeah, and we all get to grow together in the same wealth pool. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That's the beauty of a soft fork. It is backwards compatible, and if you do not opt in to use these changes to the rule set, well, don't, right? You don't have to. That's the beauty of a soft fork. And that's why, in my opinion, only a soft fork is a ethical, righteous way of upgrading the protocol and upgrading the rule set. Because per definition, any hard fork breaks the voluntary agreement that, well, we voluntarists so much treasure. So yeah. Going back to Jeremy. Okay. I think I fixed the mic now. Okay. Jeremy is saying that Bitcoin has always been about consensus. And I do agree that, of course, Bitcoin relies on the consensus of individual nodes, but it does not rely on the overall consensus. Bitcoin still works only with 5 sovereign nodes in the network, right? There doesn't need to be every single one on the globe running on the same consensus critical code. And so on the macro level, Bitcoin has never, and maybe will never reach overall consensus. Maybe, of course, we don't know. But thus, I would argue that even though Bitcoin is not not everyone is using Bitcoin yet, that still means that there is the possibility. And even though it doesn't really matter too much, because if I, as a sovereign full node, can run my own Bitcoin individual rules, and if there are other peers which we can form consensus, and then I don't really care how many are there, as long as I can get all my economic transactions done.
Yep. I just broke my fast. I was planning on breaking it around this time anyway, so pizza time.
Pizza time.
Pizza time.
Well, good that you fasted, and all the Bitcoin carnivores will be like, oh God, pizza. And,
I know. I don't even like pizza. I'm just hungry now. It's like, I need to eat something.
Well, but again, right here, right, I do believe that fasting actually fits quite well with Bitcoiners, because hodling, decreasing of time preference, increasing your planning cycle. And that means that you can stay hungry for a bit longer, because you know that in the future, you can buy more pizza with your Bitcoin.
Yeah, I think that's, to me, that's the most powerful thing about Bitcoin, and a very interesting argument, which is it's going to fundamentally change the psychology of people, or at least incentivize them to change their psychology and think long term more, and be less consumerist and spend less, be less gluttonous and greedy, right? Because, well, greedy we'll see, but definitely gluttonous, right? Because anything that you buy today could be 10x in a year, right? Or 3 years or whatever. And that's not going to go on forever. We probably have 2 or 3 more exponential rises, over the next 50, 60 years. We might have like 2 more in the next 15 years to like 100x kind of exponential rises. And then we're going to have long periods of sort of stability. But at some point we're going to just, like, once you want like $1 million Bitcoin, it basically becomes the unit of account, I believe. I mean, I don't know. That's what I've heard some math people say. I think that's pretty much the way that it would play out. I think that this is Max Keiser's argument too, that once we break about $100,000 of Bitcoin, and we bottom at $100,000 of Bitcoin, then we'll reach a certain, basically, unit of account to the currency status, because now it's significant stability, right? But I think we're probably gonna have to go like, push 500,000 and then correct to get there.
Yeah, and price talks. It will go up and it will go down again. Afterwards, it will go back up and maybe even go back down. And right, the price, although it is plummeting now back to 4,000. Oh no! Well, that's actually not so long ago that we were at these places. So. In the long run, still massive trend up, and although there are some bears like Moore, who has a good case for staying rather on the negative side here in the short term. Fundamentally, what has changed in the last 1 year and a half? We got SegWit in. We won the user activated soft fork. We defended against the hard fork. We defended against No2x. Then we got Lightning up and running. Working pretty well. Looking at the Lightning protocol specs version 1.1, they're ballers. Check out the OpTech newsletter from that came out today. It's a beauty. Just if you want to catch up what happened last, if you want to catch up with what happened in Lightning Network last week, read that newsletter and your mind will be sufficiently blown. We have coin joins now, so privacy coming. We have sidechains now, which were actually possible without SegWit. We don't need a malleability fix for sidechains. But still, all this stuff is working. Fundamentally, Bitcoin is as strong as ever, and price will follow quality and usability. So when Moon?
When Moon? Probably like 2020. I would love to see it this year, but I don't think it's going to happen anymore. Yeah, it's very exciting. I think probably 2020. We'll see 2021. We'll see somewhere around there. I don't know. I'm gonna have to check out that newsletter by Lightning. I think the Lightning thing you were mentioning, that's really interesting. Lightning stuff is very, very interesting. I think a lot of this Bcash stuff was distracting me, but I want to focus back on it and go back to the UASF stuff. It's just really interesting, the game theory about it. But I think we've made a lot of good progress. Like we've covered good ground in these discussions about UASF to have like a decent sense of what happened. So yeah, maybe I'll have a few more of those and like write an article about it, and then get back into Lightning. I'm gonna have to let you go. I'm getting like hungry for real now, and I have to go. The client's calling, so.
Well, we need to get Juan some pizza. So Piers, if you like that show, somehow get.
I'll take chicken wings if you're gonna send me some chicken wings too.
We need flying drones that come through your window, and then you can pay with a Bitcoin Lightning transactions. And once the payment has arrived, instantly the door opens up and you can get your chicken wings. You can get.
My God, that's a great idea.
Right.
Right. That's an ICO. I'll throw some money at. Especially if it's about fitting me, you got me. I'll chill it.
Well, the thing is, best thing to come, the pizza. It's on the blockchain.
Oh my God! Oh wow! It's hashed pizza.
Exactly. Well, Juan, it really was a pleasure revisiting history, because it really is so important. And as you said, the game theory behind it is fascinating, and the consensus economics or consensus praxeology it's just mind blowing. We've never seen something like this, and it absolutely is a joy to be part of this community and to grow and to see how to. Maybe continue expanding and growing on this. So, Juan, let me just shill for you, because it's so absolutely worth it. Your YouTube channel is a gem, and especially these most recent interviews about the UASF and about SegWit with all these legends. So, thank you very much for providing this content. And Juan, any last words, and where can the people find you?
And he's back. Oh, no.
There you are. Yep. Where can the people find you?
Yeah, so you can find my Twitter is on at Juan Galt. I have a website called juanesgalt.com, and then I have a YouTube channel called Juan Galt Crypto TV. So yeah, definitely check out my YouTube channel. My YouTube is for some reason screwing me and a bunch of other YouTubers as far as maybe, I don't know. Maybe I just suck, but Facebook gets about a lot more views. So Facebook people are loving my content. Anyway, you can find my videos on either platform, and yeah, you can go to my website and find all my links, and I have a bunch of interviews. And I help people protect their sovereignty. So I've been doing consulting for a couple of years. Probably like more than a couple of years, probably 3 or 4 years now. Just with myself and friends and stuff like that, and professionally, maybe a couple of years. So yeah, I help people keep their sovereignty, right? And it looks like I'm going to be going a lot harder on this. So reach out if you want to do some consulting, if you need have some questions, you want to improve your security, because part of the thing with Bitcoin that's really interesting is you got to be planning for 100x. The price might go 100x in the next 3 years. Is your security ready? Are you there yet? What does that look like, right? I think those are really interesting and important topics to discuss, and I mean it's a path that I'm exploring quite deeply. So yeah, that's kind of what I do. Juanesgalt.com. Thanks so much for having me. It was really great to talk to you. This is a really great, good conversation, and looking forward to having more in the future.
Oh yes, absolutely. Pierce, stay safe out there, and keep your non-scarce information of the Bitcoin private key only to yourself. Right? Make sure that only you have access to, and that nobody else can get access to this information. Because then, well, bye to these Bitcoin. Juan, and again the microphone. Juan, was really cool that you joined me tonight here on the show Open Source Everything here on the World Crypto Network. Really cool to getting your insights in the UASF, and definitely I learned a bit, and all these conversations always blow my mind. So that's why continuously having so much fun with them. And Pierce, check out his Twitter, link in the description. Check out the YouTube, also link in the description. And absolutely, let's continue the conversation. Glad to have you here on the WCN, Juan, and hopefully in the future as well. So Pierce, it's been a pleasure. Bye.